Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to part 4 of my collecting tips series. So in the last few videos I discussed things to keep in mind when you start collecting, like why you want to collect, what it is that you want to collect, as well as a couple of ways to start building your collection through like online auction sites or finding stuff in the wild. So today I want to touch briefly on a third option when it comes to buying or collecting items for like tabletop role-playing games. And this one's going to be more specifically for tabletop role-playing games, although I guess you can sort of apply it to the base idea to things like retro video game collecting or things along those lines. As well as some majorly important things that I think you need to keep in mind once you start actually spending money on items, regardless of how you're going to acquire them. So the first thing is the third option for people looking to get into collecting role-playing games. In this case, particularly Dungeons & Dragons, but there are other ways as well. And that is online PDF or print-on-demand collecting. So for example, Drive-Thru RPG has a huge selection of PDFs for all kinds of role-playing games. I focus mainly on Dungeons & Dragons, but I think they have some other stuff for, I want to say GURPS and Traveler. I think they have those on there. Again, I may be wrong because I only really look at the DM's Guild stuff. But for DM's Guild, they've got items for the basic expert rules, Advanced AD&D 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th, and even current stuff for 5th edition. So you can go back and get quite a few PDFs for all kinds of things. They had the D&D Rules Cyclopedia, which is the compilation of the first 4 box sets for the basic expert rules. So basic, expert, companion, and master rules. And they had that on there for quite some time, which they recently made available for print on demand, which I'll touch on in a little bit. So the PDFs thing, I did mention them in a previous video when I talked about, which I prefer, or PDFs versus physical copies. So I've already sort of made my opinions known there. But just to recap, PDF collecting is great if you just want the items and you don't have space to store everything. I mean, this is like a 6-foot tall bookshelf, and it is full. I've got stuff that's kind of scattered now in various places throughout the apartment just because that's full. I need to get another one like this to kind of go against this side wall over here. But until I do that, I'm kind of scrambling for space. So that's definitely a major concern, and PDFs can really take care of that. You can even like put them on a thumb drive, or there's all kinds of ways that you can store them so they're not even necessarily taking up space on your hard drive on your computer. They're also highly convenient if you move around a lot. And as someone who's moved about 4 times in the last 5 years, I can tell you that boxing all these up and carrying them around and lugging them is kind of a pain. Now, I still love it, and I will continue to love it, and like I said, my physical copies are never going to go anywhere, but I have friends, and one friend in particular, who has also moved around a lot, and he just says that the PDFs are so much easier. He doesn't bother with the physical copies anymore because he just doesn't want to have to take them around with them, and that's totally fine, and I understand that. So PDF collecting is another great way to build up your collection. Generally speaking, it's significantly cheaper to buy PDFs than to get physical objects. Now, I myself do not condone pirating PDFs because there are services out there that do make them available for quite a cheap price. So in my opinion, it's worth spending the $3 to $4 or $5 to get an old school AD&D module than it would to get it for free and then have this service go under because they just can't afford to keep going. So in my opinion, if you want to get PDFs, look at Drive-Thru RPG, look at DM's Guild, which is part of Drive-Thru RPG, and try to give them your business because they're an excellent service. And some of their items they do print on demand. So I picked up Scourge of the Sword Coast, which was something that was, I believe, only available as a PDF before. It was either PDF or it was part of the D&D Encounters, which was pre-Adventurers League, during the D&D Next playtest. So that was really the only way to get it. I don't think it was available for physical copies. So I picked that up, which is great. The Elemental Evil Player's Guide or Companion, which is again great. And I ordered a hardcover copy of the Rules Cyclopedia for the basic expert Dungeons and Dragons. So I think it's a great service. I think it's a great way to help fill in the gaps in your collection. When it comes to print on demand, I guess the biggest question is, do you want to do you want to have the original items, or do you just want a physical item in your collection? For me, when it comes to a lot of these things, I'm okay with the print on demand. The quality, in my opinion, has been really good for the items that I've gotten. The downside is, of course, the stuff can get damaged during shipping, like my Elemental Evil Player's Companion is kind of crumpled up at the bottom. But that's not an issue with the manufacturer, that's with shipping, and if you get anything ordered online, then that's something that can happen. But I think, they are scans, but they're high quality. Like, they've always looked clear and crisp and great. I know people said that some of the things in the past have been a bit blurry. I suspect they probably fixed those issues or got higher quality machines. Anyway, I think it's a great way to go about it. So it's another option, especially if you don't have a lot of space and limited budget and things like that. Which is what I want to talk about now. When it comes to collecting for anything, it's really important that before you start spending money, you sit down and you look at your finances. You look at how much am I making, how much am I bringing in, and how much of it is going towards my, cost of living. How much of it am I paying towards rent? How much am I paying towards my utilities? How much do I need to spend on groceries? So make sure you look at all that money first, and then whatever you have left over, you decide what to do with that. So set a budget for yourself. You have to set a limit on how much you're willing to spend out of your pay. For me, it was always around $50 to $100 a paycheck, depending on what my circumstances were at the time. When I was living with roommates, I would have, it was usually about $100 a paycheck I would set aside for gaming stuff, for D&D stuff. When I was actually actively collecting, there was a couple of years there where I just really wasn't, until I started getting back into like the 4th edition D&D. So set that budget for yourself. Collecting is great and it can be a lot of fun and it's something that you can get a lot of enjoyment out of, but you need a place to live and you need food in your stomach and your fridge and your cupboards long before you need, a D&D book in your collection. So I cannot stress that enough. Please make sure that you're spending within your means. Set aside a little bit, if you get paid, every 2 weeks, maybe even just set like $20 aside, and then at the end of the month, you've got $40, save up for a couple of months, you get 80, 120, just do things along those lines, but make sure that you set a budget for yourself. Now, every once in a while, you may find something that, you want to get, and, you may have to dip into or spend a little bit more on it than you typically would, and as long as that's the exception to the case and not something that's happening regularly, it's okay as long as your base needs are taken care of first. For example, you could probably, buy, if you live alone, you could buy like a big roast or something and you can make that up and that can be your meal for 2 or 3 days. So, you can save a little bit on food that way by making larger meals and just having lots of leftovers. But anyway, have that budget in place. Have an amount that you can know is set aside specifically for this one thing, and make sure everything else is taken care of. If you have children, their needs come before yours. So make sure that, again, that your kids are taken care of, that, they have food in their bellies, that there's, stuff in the cupboards for them, that they're taken care of, and then you can kind of look at it after that. And if that means that you're only buying, one thing to add to your collection every 2 or 3 months, then that's fine because everything else is taken care of first. Collecting isn't something that you need to have, a massive bookshelf, overnight. This is really, honestly, it's about 15 years of collecting is on these shelves here. So, going down, there's, 3 or 4 other shelves below this. But anyway, that's over a very long period of time. So I always made sure everything else was taken care of. Another thing that I think is kind of important is to set a price limit on yourself for what you're willing to spend in order to add things to your collection. For example, I refuse to spend more than $100 on anything that's in my collection. So that's limited me to a few things. Like back in 2013, I think it was, Wizard of the Coast did a reprint of the 0 edition D&D books. And I didn't have the ones from my friend yet, so I didn't have 0 edition, and it was really tempting, but it was going to be like $130 Canadian. And it's just like, that's too much. I mean, I'm not going to play it. Yeah, it comes in a nice wooden box, and yeah, it comes with, a set of dice that have all these designs around it that make it kind of hard to read. But that's a lot of money. That's more money than I'm willing to spend. So I didn't get it. And they also redesigned all the covers, so that may, affect things as well. But it's just like, that was just too much for me. The only thing that I have that I've spent more than $100 on, in terms of my D&D collection, would be the Assault of the Giants board game that I have up here. Because it was, I think, 115 Canadian after plus taxes. But I had Christmas money, and I had a $50 MasterCard that was given to me for Christmas. So I only spent $60 on it. My colossal red dragon that you've seen in some of the videos, this great big massive red dragon miniature, was $90. So again, I haven't spent over $100 on any single item in my collection when it comes to tabletop role-playing, and that's the way that it's going to stay. That's a hard limit for myself. The exceptions, again, might be board games, but typically I would have other ways of knocking that price down before I start actually, spending my money on it. Ultimately, I only want to spend about $60 to $80 of my own money on those games, because that's what my Castle Ravenloft, Wrath of Ashardalon, and Legend of Dritz games cost me. So have that sort of hard limit for yourself. Like, this is the absolute maximum that I'm willing to spend of my money on these items. Now, when it comes to buying used items, I also have a separate price category that I wouldn't go above. And for me, that is typically around $40. When I look at used books, they're used. To me, they're used. And I come from an era in time before all these types of collecting became really massive. Not that there weren't like collectors or things that were priced because of collecting, but a lot of stuff that I was into really wasn't there yet. Like video games was one of the big things when I was a kid, and they weren't, video game collecting wasn't really in yet. So used games were typically about half the price of, or less than, what you would buy at the store. Most of my Super Nintendo games that I had when I was a kid cost me no more than 20 bucks. So when it comes to buying used D&D books, $40 is really my limit. I recently saw a copy of Expedition to the Expedition to the Ruins of Undermountain, I think it was. It was part of the 3rd edition Expedition series, so they were kind of modern updates of old school modules. I have Expedition to Castle Ravenloft and Expedition to the Demon Web Pits, which is like the Castle Ravenloft was obviously like sort of an amalgamation of Ravenloft 1 and 2. And Expedition to the Demon Web Pits is when you go in, and you face Loth, in the Abyss. So it's sort of that, Queen of the Demon Web Pits. It's kind of based off of that. So I had an opportunity to pick up this one for Undermountain. And there was the one for Undermountain, and there was the one for Castle Greyhawk, which had Mordenkainen on the cover. And I didn't get them at the time because I just had way too many adventures. I have tons of Dungeon Magazine adventures. So, and I was running the campaign paths at this point. I think I was still running Shackled City at this point. So I had Shackled City, Age of Worms, and Savage Tide that were complete campaigns for 1st to 20th level. I didn't need any more adventures. That's why I didn't get the last 3 of the Forgotten Realms books that were released for 3.5, because they were more adventures than anything else, and I just wasn't interested. But it's kind of a gap now in my collection that sort of bothers me, but not really, because I saw this, Undermountain one. And it's like, okay, well, I'll pick that up if it's like, 20, 30, 40 bucks. It was charging $55 for it, which is the price that it would have been when it was brand new. And I think it may have been new stock. Like, I don't think it was something that was brought in for trade-in, but it was just sitting on the shelf. And that, if that was brand new, like if that was stock that they had gotten in, that had been on their shelves for over a decade, and they're still charging like brand new price for it, which to me was just not going to happen. I might have spent that money back then because it was current, but I'm not going to get a 12 or 13-year-old book for full retail price. So that was something that was just, no, not going to happen. When it came to my player's options books for 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, they were ones that I really wanted. The Skills and Powers was around $15 or $16, I think it was, and it's like, that's a good price. Snatched it up. The Combat and Tactics book was $25, and that one I actually had to think about, because for me that seemed like even though it was under my limit of 40, it still seemed like a lot for this second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons book. That is one of those like really divisive, either you love it or hate it kind of things. So I thought about it, and it took me a couple of times going into the store to finally just pick it up. What did it for me was that they had 2 copies of it for the longest time, and then they were just down to 1. And they had just the other skills or spells and the spells and whatever the name was for that one. So they had that in there as well, and they just had these last 2 left, and it's like, all right, you know, I'm just going to grab them. But it's still at $25. That still felt like, again, it was kind of close enough to my upper limit that I didn't feel super comfortable doing it. But I had to think about it, and it's like, what are the odds I'm going to find this again? Probably not that great. So I, picked it up. But that is something that you need to sort of have an idea of. So set hard limits for yourself. Make sure that you're not going above and beyond, because the fact of the matter is, and this even goes for eBay collecting, because I know when it comes to eBay, like my story with the person selling that soft-covered player's handbook, there are people that will price things because they know that someone will be desperate enough to pay for it at some point down the road. So don't be that person, Make sure you set a limit for yourself. Make sure you're not going beyond that, unless it's like the super rare exception. So my $100 limit, I probably could have broken that to get those 0 edition books. It just, to me, wasn't worth it. But it's something to obviously kind of have in mind. And when you're going back and buying a lot of the old school stuff, it can be difficult to do it cheaply, because if you're looking at box sets, for example, they are always ridiculously overpriced, in my opinion. So just, again, have those limits. Make sure that you are taking care of everything at home first. Your collection is a hobby. It's not something that's meant to affect or negatively impact the rest of your life. So make sure you got a place to live in. Make sure your rent is paid on time as best as you can. Make sure that your utilities are taken care of. Make sure that your power bill is paid. Make sure that your internet and cable or whatever else that you have is paid. And make sure that you have food. Make sure that you're able to take care of yourself, and that your health's not going to suffer, just so you can have a bookshelf full of books that you're not going to use as much as you hope you might. So anyway, that was just my advice for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and again, let me know in the comments below if you have any other suggestions along those lines, or if you have any tips or tricks for setting budgets for yourself. So this is probably going to be the last one for a few days. What I want to do is sometime next week I want to make a video about sort of inventorying or cataloging your collection, the things that you have. And I'm going to try to see if I can find some online resources before I make that video. So this is going to be it for a little bit. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed the series. It's gotten some pretty positive responses, and that means a lot to me. Hopefully it's going to help somebody down the road at some point as well. So thank you guys again for watching. See you next time.